Without further ado, we will get started. And I am going to start by calling up a panel of legislators on the Climate Change Superfund bill. Representative Owens, Rep. Lewis, and Senator Eldridge. Hello.
Good afternoon, Chair Barber, Chair Roush, members of the committee. Thank you so much for taking us out of turn and allowing us to go early. This is a treat. Thank you. Not that it's always a treat talking to this panel, honestly. We're here to speak in favor of H 1014 and S 588, an act establishing a climate change superfund, or the Polluters Pay Act. The principle of polluters pay is very simple. Those who make a mess should be the ones who clean it up. Those of you with children like myself know that this is sometimes a hard lesson to learn, but it is a very important one. It is not necessarily one that comes naturally, but it is one that we should encourage. And that's what I'm asking the legislature to do, is encourage that lesson to be learned by some of the largest polluters of fossil fuel emissions in the Commonwealth. The bill we proposed is very simple as well. It imposes a fee on the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in Massachusetts that would go into a climate resiliency superfund. The bill is familiar to one we proposed last session with a couple of key differences, and we'll have some experts testify to those in later panels, both on the legal and the other changes that we've advanced. Rather than assign a dollar amount for that fossil fuel polluters are responsible for paying back in the legislation itself, the bill before you now creates a public and a transparent process to determine that amount through attribution science. A big difference, though, between now and 2 years ago is the national context. Since last we were in front of this committee, both Vermont and New York have passed their versions of polluters pay bills. States like California, New Jersey, Washington, Oregon, they all have bills under consideration as well. And the idea that the polluter pays for carbon emissions is gaining traction nationwide. Massachusetts, we here have the opportunity to join those states in enacting legislation that fuels the movement to hold companies accountable and fund climate adaptation efforts at the same time as the federal government is rolling back policies that would combat climate change and leaving us to deal with the costs and the public health externalities ourselves. In the bill, the polluters would pay. The polluters that would pay in this context are those companies that have gotten away with polluting our air with greenhouse gases, knowing the consequences. Companies like ExxonMobil, for example, which forecasted how climate change would cause global temperatures to rise as long ago as the 1970s. Their private research predicted how burning fossil fuels would warm the planet, even as the company publicly denied the link. So this bill requires that big polluters pay a fee based on their share of historic emissions that would go to EEA for the purposes of the Climate Change Adaptation Superfund. And the Superfund model, as we know, works very well. My experience in Watertown is an example of a Superfund success story. The EPA added the Watertown arsenal to the national priorities list in 1994. Cleanup activities removed contamination and demolished an old nuclear reactor, and now the former arsenal is once again an engine of growth in town. So the cost recovery program set up by this bill, it can do the same for those areas most impacted by the devastating effects of climate change. We know that storms are going to be more serious. Sea level rise is happening already. Shoreline erosion, storm surges that's impacting our coast. Rising temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns are likely to increase the intensity of both floods and droughts and wildfires. So this is our chance to prepare the Commonwealth for the inevitable. The bill is designed to hold those responsible for extreme weather events accountable, further allowing cities and towns to prepare and, most importantly, protect their residents. With that, I'm going to pass it to my Senate filer, Senator Eldridge.
Great. So good afternoon, and thank you so much to Chairwoman Barber, Chairwoman Roush, and members of the Joint Committee for taking us out of turn, and proud to be the Senate sponsor of the Climate Fund Superfund bill alongside my colleagues, Representative Owens and Representative Lewis. And Representative Owens mentioned a personal example from his district. For me, going back to the federal Superfund law, growing up in the town of Acton, one of the things that I learned growing up in the town of Acton is a company by the name of W.R. Grace had contaminated 2 of the wells in South Acton, and because of the federal Superfund law, after litigation by the EPA, those 2 wells were able to be cleaned up by fining W.R. Grace to clean up those wells, which still happens to this day. So in many respects, this is based on that same model of given the damage that fossil fuel companies have placed on our state, obviously the country and the world, this is the model that we're putting forward. As you all know, this is part of a national effort. Grateful to Vermont and New York for passing their laws. In the beginning phases of implementing their laws, we had the chance to compare notes at the National Conference of Environmental Legislators Conference just a few weeks ago, where the national organization was there. And so I think what I would add to what Representative Owens said is that this is, of course, led here in Massachusetts by Mass 350, by the Better Future Project. And the focus is on this climate cost study. Representative Owens made reference to changes in this bill compared to last session. So the reference, instead of looking at 2000 to 2018 impacts by fossil fuels on the state, it would look at impacts between 1995 and 2024 to get a more robust assessment of the damages on our state, whether you're talking about flooding, heat waves, other impacts that are impacting each of our communities. And we believe with this advisory council in the bill that would come up with a number for what would be the assessment, if you will, on fossil fuel companies, it could address a wide range of climate applications from across Massachusetts, including investments in coastal protections, wetland restoration, urban tree canopy, defensive upgrades to transit infrastructure, and building weatherization. Recognizing that arguably the biggest and most negative impacts have been to environmental justice communities, including the district I represent, 40% of all the spending would be directed to benefit environmental justice communities, ensuring equitable access to climate resilience resources. And want to note the bill would also include strong labor and equity standards, recognizing that if there are large-scale projects to address the damage, there could be apprenticeship programs, complying with fair labor practices, pay prevailing wages, and really reflect in many ways the climate law that passed last session and the work closely with labor unions to make sure this is something that's also good for many workers. So I'll conclude and just say that in many ways the comparison for what the fossil fuel industry has done to this country and to the world is comparable to the tobacco industry, which lied for decades about the negative health impacts of smoking and tobacco. So in many ways we're making this comparison that ExxonMobil, other fossil fuel companies knew for decades, even going back, I believe, to the 1960s about the impact on climate, but tonight here's an opportunity to raise some revenue to address some of the inequities and damage that have been incurred in communities across Massachusetts. So thank you so much for taking us out of turn, and thanks to the committee for paying so close attention to this bill.
Thank you. Wanted to also thank the chairs and the committee for this opportunity, and thank my co-filers for inviting me to join you as a second lead House sponsor. Life, as we all know, is full of uncertainties. Those of you who have control issues like me, that might be the thing you most struggle with. But when it comes to global warming, or climate change more specifically, there aren't those same uncertainties anymore. We all know, maybe not all of us are willing to admit it, but we all know that climate change is real, and the effects it is having on our communities are happening today. It's going to be worse tomorrow, and science is already giving us a glimpse into how much worse things are going to get. There was some uncertainty as it related to January 20th. We didn't know what this new presidential administration was going to do. Now, more than 8 months in, the only uncertainty that remains is how much worse things are going to get. And so this bill before us is the intersection of both of those realities. We know that things are bad. 2 years ago, 2023, the mass flooding in Western Mass that damaged $39 million in public infrastructure. Not even talking about private infrastructure, but $39 million in public infrastructure. We already know in the last 8 months, and some of this funding, that roller coaster, has been taken back and then given and taken back. But we've already had the this federal administration claw back $32 million for low carbon transportation, construction materials, $90 million for 18 communities in disaster prevention aid directly to those 18 municipalities, $20.8 million to protect farmlands, forests, and wetlands, and $25 million to protect 10,000 acres along the Connecticut River. And this is in addition to the recent announcement that almost $700 million has been clawed back or withdrawn in offshore wind projects. Climate change exists. It's only going to get worse. And we as a Commonwealth have to start thinking more creatively about how we're going to help our municipalities meet this urgent need, not only in preventing the worsening of this current reality, but also making sure our communities, our local municipalities, have the resources they need to build that resiliency that we all know they all need. The other reality being that the average municipality that we represent only has about $5,000 ready for such a disaster today. And we don't know which community will be next. But before we know it, we're going to wake up to a text or a tweet or an email or a news bulletin about a community somewhere in the Commonwealth that's facing the similar millions and millions of dollars of damage because of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for the panel? Rep. Sweezy.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you, all three of you. As someone who represents a coastal community and sees the impact of worsening storms on our beaches and the cost that is, I really appreciate the work that you guys have put into this. Just two quick questions. I know you talked about the formula and the actual dollar values will come at a later time. I guess just for my own understanding, is this something that's only affecting like an ExxonMobil? Is this like 3 companies? Is this like 30 companies? What does that framework kind of look like? And forgive me if there's someone else better to answer this question later on, that's fine as well. But just that's one. And then the only other thing that I had, kind of a second part to that, is what stops this, I guess, from getting down to the consumer, right? What's going to stop, a gas price or an electric price from just, these companies are the one polluting, and then we're the ones that are having to pay for their work. So I guess those are just my two general things there.
Yeah, happy to answer those questions. Thank you for asking. So this is intended for only the largest polluters of greenhouse gases. And the threshold, I believe, was somewhere around 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That was at least in the last bill, and the folks coming after us will know the exact numbers. But a ton of carbon dioxide is about the volume of this room, a little bit less maybe. And imagine 1 billion of those. So that will only impact the largest polluters. So folks like ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, but it won't trickle down. And one of the reasons we're confident that it won't trickle down to the consumer is, one, it doesn't affect everybody. So it won't affect your home heating oil supplier, the neighborhood supplier. And it won't really, it'll be a one-time assessment. It won't be an ongoing, it's not a carbon tax, so it's not something that's ongoing that will add to the price of oil or the price of fuel going forward. This is something that will not be continuing as it goes forward. It's to pay for things that have already happened. The other part of this is, look, the fossil fuel companies, just in 2024, Exxon, Shell, and Chevron together bought back $50 billion worth of their own stock. They can buy back a little bit less, and they will likely have to. They may have to do that. I don't know. I'm not an accountant, but they have the funds to be able to do this, and they've been making billions of dollars in profits over the past many years to pay for these buybacks. So that's what I would say to that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Rep. Gasky.
So your bill, when you're talking about this, to start with, when you're talking about looking at the companies who are the largest, you're saying who are the largest polluters. Are those polluters in Massachusetts? Are those polluters in Massachusetts, or are they polluters that are global?
So these are some multinational companies, but they also, they have a footprint in Massachusetts, and anybody who has a footprint in Massachusetts is subject to this. And this is where the damage is being felt. The damage is being our residents are being impacted, and that's why we're using that rubric.
Okay, and then just to follow up with, regarding some of these companies that you're considering as the largest polluters, what about companies that are involved in environmental destruction? Like, say, down in southeast Massachusetts, where they have over 2 miles of sand mining that are occurring, where they've deforested, devegetated entire areas, exposing the water source for the entire area to pollution and stuff like that. Will those people be held accountable? They have to pay into the Superfund. Because that's when you take away the trees and the vegetation, you increase the evaporation into the atmosphere. You're taking away water from people, and at the same time, it's exposing the whole area to more heat because trees create shade, and that's what we're all looking for.
And I'm familiar with that problem. This bill does not cover that. It's kind of out of scope for what we're trying to do. But I do know that there are other bills that I believe are before this committee that have that address that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to the panel. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.